All right, guys, welcome to part two. The last section, we spoke about local government. We talked about county government. We talked about special districts. And now we're going to focus more on local government. This being your city council, your mayor, or city managers, however it's set up. And we're going to take a look at the different types of local government that are, in other words, the type of governance that different municipalities might use. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is to research your own community where you live. Get a feel for what type of local government that exists in your community in terms of governance. And we'll talk about that here in just a second because that might help you as you start dealing with some of the topics that we're going to be discussing, because maybe there's something that's been going on in your community that you can use as a good example as to how this process works in terms of the governance style. Okay, so now municipalities includes something other than cities. Oftentimes we think of municipalities, we might think of big cities, but keep in mind that there are four basic governance systems used by municipalities. And we're going to talk about those, and we're going to look at things such as cities and townships and what are the differences. Now, cities are legal entities incorporated for the purpose of self-government at the local level. So again, if you live in a city, it'll have an incorporation date. And that's the date that this geographical area became a city, which would allow them more self-governance, more control over what the community is and how it takes shape, all right? Then you could have townships. Now, townships are local governments whose powers, governance structure, and legal status vary from state to state. In some states, townships function as general purpose municipalities, so they're sort of like cities. In others, they're geographical subdivisions of counties with few responsibilities and little power. So again, being in the U.S., we have an array of cities and we have townships. And so maybe you live in a township and not necessarily a city. So again, you can take a look at some of these definitions we just talked about in terms of level of control and responsibilities, and you can make a determination from there. So municipalities, there is a variation in terms of power that lies within municipalities. Typically, that power in municipalities lies or can lie with the mayor, city council, and or city manager. And so now we're just going to talk about municipalities, and let's talk about the need for municipalities and why they're important. Municipal governments are general purpose governments that provide a range of public services and address a variety of political issues at the local level. They are brought into existence because groups of citizens, usually those concentrated in compact urban areas, want to exercise a degree of political self-determination over their community. Accordingly, they incorporate, bringing to life a legal entity, a municipality that grants them the right to a broad degree of self-governance. So becoming a city, the incorporation process allows you more self-governance and control over what happens within a specific geographical area. So cities all over the U.S. Where you live, they have boundaries. And that's the incorporated area of that specific city. That may be small, that may be extremely large. But the whole point being that there is that control. The local residents, the local people have control over what goes on within that geographical area. Typically free from any outside influence, but not necessarily 100%. Might depend on how your state is set up in terms of authority and those kind of things. But there is a certain level of self-governance that municipalities have, and that's why they become incorporated. Now, municipalities come in a couple different flavors, and we're going to take a look at those. Those are going to be a strong and weak mayor system. So we have mayor-council systems. So elected executive and elected legislature. So your mayor is elected and your city council is elected. In some cases, there's a separation of power between the elected executive, the mayor, and the elected legislature, the city council or council members, or however your community refers to them. There is a strong and weak mayor system, and there's the extensive policy-making power associated with city councils. All right, so let's talk about the strong and weak mayor system. Now, in a strong mayor system, the executive is roughly the municipal level equivalent of a governor. He or she has a great deal of power. They have the authority to make appointments to key city offices. They can veto council decisions. They prepare budgets. They run the day-to-day operations of municipal government in general. For example, the mayor of New York City has the power to hire and fire the heads of more than 40 city agencies, including the police commissioner and the school chancellor. He appoints judges to the criminal courts of the city of New York and has responsibility for proposing the city's budget, which in 2018, the city budget for the city of New York topped $88 billion. So clearly, the strong mayor has a significant amount of influence at City Hall. And basically is responsible for the day-to-day operations of running city government. So a considerable amount of power lies with that person, especially if they have the ability to veto pieces of legislation that the local city council there might be considering. Now, the weak mayor system is more of a ceremonial office rather than a policymaker. Mayors in this format have both powers and exercise considerable influence, but they have to do this by using their powers of persuasion rather than the authority vested in their office. Now, this type of weak mayor system exists in some large cities, for example, in San Diego, California, which is, I think, probably close to 1 million people. And a good example of how this mayor in the weak system can become a significant policymaker and have considerable influence was Pete Wilson, who was the mayor of San Diego, I believe in the 1980s. He was able to collaborate with others to get things done. Even as a weak mayor, he was able to do this. In fact, Pete Wilson later went on to become the governor of the state of California. So you can see some of the little differences between the strong mayor and the weak mayor system. Again, in the strong mayor, considerable influence, has the power to hire and fire department heads. In the weak mayor system, it's more of a ceremonial rather than policy making. A lot of the power in a weak mayor system lies with the city council, not necessarily the mayor. However, mayors in both have power and have both powers and exercise considerable influence. And in the weak mayor system, they do this by persuasion rather than the authority vested in their office. Okay, so that's the key distinction between the strong mayor, weak mayor system in terms of our government, local government. This is a quick chart. I'm just going to skip through this, but I'll leave a copy of the PowerPoint for you to look at your leisure if you wish. Next, I'm going to talk about the CouncilManager System. Now, the CouncilManager System, here the day-to-day administration is carried out by a professional administrator. The history of this lies with the history of politics in general. And then we'll talk a little bit about the powers of the city manager and the traits of the city manager. I also posted a short video in our announcement this week on this particular topic, the council manager form of governance. Now, this is based on the principle of separating the political and administrative functions of government. So in this particular case, a council makes policy decisions, but places the implementation of those decisions in the hands of a professional administrator, usually called the city manager, hired by the city council. Now, city managers came into being in places, historically, when you look at places such as Boston, Chicago, New York, they were governed by charismatic politicians who took advantage of their ties to ethnic minorities, such as the Irish or the Italians. We're talking about patronage jobs were given out to their personal friends, whose chief qualification that they were campaign supporters. Elections were fraught with partisanship, which produced a high incumbent re-election rates. Many political machines or machine insiders got themselves elected as city commissioners, or were given authority to run individual departments, including police, fire, sanitation, and so forth. This resulted in a politically powerful but often corrupt and incompetent municipal governments. So that gave rise to the city manager form of government. Okay, under the manager or the council manager system, the powers of the city manager, he's empowered to hire and fire all city employees, set pay scales, prepare an annual budget that is approved by elected officials and implemented by staff, and make policy recommendations. All right. So the city manager works for the city council. So let's say the city council has told the city manager, we need to start, one of their policies, for example, let's say, is to improve recycling within the community. Maybe they think that they're not doing a good job of recycling within the city. And so the manager then is given that policy. That policy is increase recycling among city residents. In other words, how do we get them to recycle more so that less goes into the landfill? And then the city manager's job then is to develop that policy. And he'll work with his department heads, typically his department head who's in charge of public works, and figure out how they're going to go about being able to increase people's use of, the residents' use of recycling. Okay, so that's what his power is, but he has the ability to hire and fire all city employees, right? And sets the pay scale. He often does negotiations with unions within the city to get their pay raises and so forth. So most city employees will deal with the city manager, or in some cases assistant city manager when it comes time to negotiating a contract. Traits of the city manager: the ICMA, the International City Managers Association, estimates that the majority of city managers have advanced degrees, extensive training, experience, and ability to make sound administrative decisions, in addition to the ability to maintain good relationships with city council members, and that leads to success in the job. And I think that's going to be key for any city manager. You have to be able to balance several things, as compared to a strong mayor, for example, who may have little to no extensive training or experience in running city government or making sound administrative decisions. All right. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying that could potentially be a con. All right. Again, here's municipal manager, or city manager, or council manager form of government. The commission system is I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this originated in Galveston, Texas in the early 1900s. Galveston had suffered a devastating hurricane that killed thousands, with the city in ruins. The existing city government proved ineffective in dealing with the aftermath of this disaster. In response, the Texas legislature approved a completely new form of municipal government, the commission system, to try and deal with the huge task of rebuilding the city. It proved successful. Galveston was built and put back on track, on civic track. The success led to other municipalities to follow Galveston's lead and adopt the commission form of governance. Now, many cities do not use this system. There are some drawbacks. The merging, for example, of elected and administrative positions leads to commissioners becoming the entrenched advocates of their departments and winning an election, and administering large bureaucracies is very difficult. And I'm going to stop here and pick this up here again in just a second.